Two of the richest men on Earth are locked in a battle that goes far beyond money, power, or politics. This is a war for the future of space itself, and the stakes have never been higher than they are right now. Jeff Bezos just made his boldest move yet. Blue Origin, his aerospace company that has been quietly building in the background for over 2 decades, was preparing to launch the New Glenn rocket, a massive 320-foot-tall machine built to go head-to-head with Elon Musk's SpaceX. Jeff Bezos founded Blue Origin in the year 2000, 2 full years before Elon Musk even started SpaceX. Let that sink in for a second. Bezos was in the space business before Musk, but while SpaceX was moving fast, failing fast, learning fast, and making noise, Blue Origin was moving quietly. For years and years, Bezos kept his company out of the spotlight while Musk was making headlines every single month. SpaceX launched its first successful rocket to orbit in 2008. They landed a reusable orbital-class booster for the first time in 2015. They sent astronauts to the International Space Station. They launched hundreds of missions for governments and commercial customers around the world. They built the Falcon 9 into the most dominant, most trusted, most frequently flown rocket on planet Earth. By the time Blue Origin finally started talking seriously about building an orbital rocket, SpaceX had already built an empire in space. That orbital rocket Blue Origin had been working on was called New Glenn. It was named after John Glenn, the legendary NASA astronaut who became the first American to orbit the Earth. It was publicly announced in 2016 and was originally planned to make its first flight by the year 2020. But delays came, then more delays, then more after that. Year after year, New Glenn stayed on the ground while SpaceX kept flying missions at a pace nobody else could match. By 2024, Blue Origin had still not flown New Glenn to orbit. The rocket was finally sitting on the launch pad, but every single day that passed without a flight was another day Elon Musk's company pulled further and further ahead. The pressure on Bezos and his entire team was almost impossible to describe. They had one shot at proving to the world that Blue Origin was real competition and not just a billionaire's expensive hobby project that would never truly threaten SpaceX's dominance. The launch was originally scheduled for early January 2025. Blue Origin announced a 3-hour window opening at 1 a.m. on Sunday, targeting Cape Canaveral's Launch Complex 36. This was a launch pad that had sat completely dormant for nearly 2 decades before Blue Origin revived it for New Glenn. The excitement building around this launch was enormous. People across the space industry and beyond hadn't seen a brand new American heavy-lift rocket debut in years. New Glenn wasn't just another rocket. It was a statement, a declaration of intent from Jeff Bezos to the entire aerospace world. But space doesn't care about schedules, public pressure, or investor expectations. The first launch attempt on January 10th was scrubbed. The reason was rough seas in the Atlantic Ocean, where Blue Origin was planning to attempt recovery of the rocket's first stage booster. If the ocean was too violent, the recovery ship. Then on January 13th, the countdown began again, and it stopped again. This time the problem was ice. Ice had formed on a purge line attached to an auxiliary power unit that powers some of the rocket's hydraulic systems. Engineers worked through the night trying to fix the issue, but they ran out of time before the launch window closed. The scrub was called, and New Glenn stood down again. Bad weather pushed the next attempt back even further. And then, during the final countdown on the night of January 15th, zone near the launch corridor, forcing the countdown team to hold the clock while authorities cleared the vessel. Every delay added more pressure, more public doubt, and more commentary from skeptics asking whether Blue Origin could actually pull this off after so many years of waiting. Finally, in the early morning hours of January 16th, 2025, everything aligned. At exactly 2 or 3 a.m. Eastern Time, the 7 BE-4 engines on New Glenn's first stage roared to life simultaneously, producing a combined 3.9 million pounds of thrust. A brilliant, blazing orange glow erupted beneath the rocket and lit up the entire Florida coastline as New Glenn lifted off the pad and began its long-awaited journey toward orbit. The sound that followed shook the ground and shook the hearts of everyone who had waited years to see this moment finally arrive. The flight went remarkably well from start to finish. New Glenn's second stage fired twice using its BE-3U engines, completing 2 successful burns and precisely delivering the payload to medium Earth orbit. The payload on this maiden flight was the Blue Ring Pathfinder, a demonstration vehicle designed to showcase Blue Origin's future space logistics and mobility platform called Blue Ring. Shortly after reaching orbit, the Blue Ring Pathfinder powered on and began transmitting data back to Earth exactly as planned. In doing so, Blue Origin accomplished something that very few organizations in the entire history of rocketry have ever pulled off. They successfully reached orbit on their very first orbital launch attempt. Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp spoke after the launch with clear emotion and pride. He called it a new era for Blue Origin and for commercial space overall. He said he was incredibly proud of what the team had achieved through years of hard work, setbacks, and relentless effort. He also acknowledged openly that attempting to land the first stage booster on the very first flight was always going to be an ambitious goal, but that they were going to try anyway because that is who they are as a company. Origin's recovery vessel called Jacklyn, which was positioned roughly 375 miles offshore in the Atlantic Ocean. The booster successfully reignited 3 of its 7 BE-4 engines and performed its entry burn as designed, but shortly after, telemetry data coming from the booster went completely silent. The booster was lost during its descent and never made it onto the recovery ship. The first stage was gone. For Blue Origin, it was both a triumph and a lesson at the same time. The main mission objective, reaching orbit, was completed flawlessly. But the reusability demonstration, which is the technological capability that has allowed SpaceX to completely transform the economics of rocket launches and dominate the market, remained out of reach for now. SpaceX had first landed a Falcon 9 booster in December of 2015 and had been doing it routinely and reliably ever since. Blue Origin still had ground to cover. But here is where the story becomes truly remarkable. Blue Origin came back stronger than ever. On November 13th, 2025, New Glenn flew its second mission called NG-2. This time, the rocket was carrying the twin Escapade spacecraft for NASA. Escapade stands for Escape and Plasma Acceleration and Dynamics Explorers. It is a first-of-its-kind science mission designed to send 2 commercially built spacecraft to orbit Mars and study how the solar wind interacts with Mars' atmosphere and magnetic field. Scientists believe this interaction is responsible for Mars losing most of its ancient atmosphere over billions of years, turning it from a potentially habitable world with liquid water into the dry, cold desert planet we see today. The NG-2 launch had its own drama. It was initially planned for November 9th, but was scrubbed due to weather. Then it was delayed again on November 12th because of a powerful solar storm. 2 massive coronal mass ejections had impacted Earth's magnetosphere, creating dangerous conditions in the space environment around Earth. The delay was deeply ironic because the very solar weather phenomena that were disrupting the launch were the exact same kinds of interactions that the Escapade mission was designed to study around Mars. Space had a strange sense of humor that week. When November 13th arrived and the conditions finally cleared, New Glenn launched flawlessly. Both Escapade spacecraft were successfully deployed on a trajectory toward Mars, but the most stunning moment of the entire mission came about 7 minutes into the flight. As New Glenn's first stage booster fell back through Earth's atmosphere after completing its job, it reignited its engines for a controlled entry burn. Then, 2 minutes later, the booster performed a precise propulsive touchdown and landed vertically on the deck of the Jacklyn vessel, 375 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean. The landing worked perfectly. Blue Origin had done it. For the first time in history, a company other than SpaceX had successfully launched a spacecraft to orbit and then recovered the rocket's first stage booster in the same mission. The booster for this flight was named Never Tell Me the Odds, and it lived up to its name completely. Blue Origin's announcer during the live webcast was overcome with excitement, declaring that a landed orbital rocket was an incredible day for Blue Origin and for the entire space industry. She was right. Even Elon Musk responded publicly. He posted congratulations to Jeff Bezos and the Blue Origin team. It was genuine, and it carried real weight coming from a man who built the standard that everyone else in the industry is chasing. Musk's acknowledgement made it clear that something real had shifted. Blue Origin was no longer a company that talked about competing with SpaceX. It was a company that was actually doing it. New Glenn is an impressive machine by any measure. It stands 321 feet tall and is 7 meters wide. Its payload fairing is so large that 3 school buses could fit inside it side by side. It is capable of carrying up to 45 metric tons of cargo to low Earth orbit, which places it in the same class as SpaceX's Falcon Heavy. Blue Origin has designed the first stage boosters to withstand at least 25 flights each, meaning every booster recovered can be flown again and again, which is exactly what drives down the cost of getting to space over time. The customer lineup for New Glenn is already impressive and growing. Amazon has booked 12 launches of New Glenn to deploy satellites for Project Kuiper, the satellite internet constellation that Bezos is building to compete directly with Musk's Starlink service. The U.S. Space Force selected Blue Origin as one of the certified providers to compete for a $5.6 billion national security launch contract. NASA has contracted New Glenn for multiple science missions beyond Escapade. Telesat, AST Space Mobile, and other major satellite operators have also signed agreements to fly their hardware on New Glenn in the coming years, and Blue Origin is already thinking far beyond New Glenn as it exists today. On November 20th, 2025, the company announced development of a completely new variant called the New Glenn 9X4. This super heavy lift rocket will feature 9 BE-4 engines on its first stage and 4 BE-3U engines on its second stage. According to Blue Origin, it will be capable of launching more than 70,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit, making it more powerful than any American rocket currently flying, except for SpaceX's Starship. The New Glenn 9X4 is being designed to compete for mega constellation deployments, lunar cargo missions, and deep space exploration contracts that currently only a handful of rockets on Earth can handle. The competition between Bezos and Musk goes well beyond launch vehicles and satellites. Both men have spoken about space becoming the next great frontier for data centers and AI infrastructure. Bezos has said publicly that the energy and manufacturing potential of space could fundamentally change life on Earth, just as weather satellites and communication satellites did before. Both companies are also competing for NASA's Artemis program contracts to build lunar landers that could put human beings on the surface of the moon before the end of this decade for the first time since 1972. SpaceX still holds a massive advantage that cannot be ignored. The Falcon 9 alone completed 165 launches in a single year, accounting for 85% of all American orbital launches. SpaceX operates more than 10,000 Starlink satellites providing internet service globally. And then there is Starship, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, which Musk claims will eventually carry 300 tons to orbit and make every other launch vehicle economically obsolete through sheer cost reduction at scale. Blue Origin has a long, long road to travel before it matches that level of capability and pace. But for the first time, Blue Origin is not just talking about competing. They're launching real rockets. They're landing real boosters. They're delivering real scientific payloads for NASA. They are signing real contracts with real customers. The distance between SpaceX and Blue Origin is still enormous, but it is shrinking, and in a race that will play out over decades, the direction of travel matters just as much as the current position. Jeff Bezos built Blue Origin around a completely different philosophy than Musk used to build SpaceX. Where Musk celebrated speed, risk, and public failure as a path to rapid learning, Bezos chose patience, precision, and long-term reliability. For years, that approach made Blue Origin look like it was standing still while SpaceX was sprinting. But perhaps the strategy was always about winning the long game rather than the first lap. New Glenn is not just a rocket. It is proof of concept. It is proof that Blue Origin is serious, disciplined, and capable of building and flying world-class hardware. It is proof that Jeff Bezos is not going to allow Elon Musk to own the future of space without a real fight. And it is proof that the most consequential competition of this generation is not winding down. It is just getting started. The Sunday launch the world had been waiting years to see was never just another rocket test. It was the moment Blue Origin stepped onto the field. And now that they are here, nothing about this race will be the same again.